it's Mrs. Tremblay. It's time for lesson 8.3 on circle graphs, or aka pie charts. They both mean the same thing. So what is a circle graph? Well, it's a kind of graph that displays data as sections of a circle. Usually it's out of a percentage. It doesn't have to be. But basically, it's a circle that's a graph. Hee hee. Okay, so the circle, the entire circle, represents all of the data, and each section represents part of the data. We know that the highest you can have is 100%, right? So if you have this full circle filled up, it represents 100%. But in terms of not percents, just having a circle graph, there are 360 degrees in this circle. So I know that you're probably used to looking at this in terms of a percent. Today we're going to learn how to use degrees to complete our circle graphs. So a little bit different here. Let me try to get this in focus a little bit better. Okay, there we go. So when the data are given as a percent, and you're trying to figure out how many degrees is that, all we have to do is multiply the decimal form of each percent by 360. So kind of relating this to terms you understand, if you got a 25 out of 30 on a quiz, in order to figure out what the percentage is out of 100, you would take 25 divided by 30, and you would multiply that by 100, right? Because you want it to be 100%. This is kind of the same idea. We're going to multiply the decimal form of each percent by 360, because I want it to be out of 360 instead. So this is what I'm talking about, in case this isn't making any sense. In looking at this, I want to know how many degrees is represented by the apple, how many degrees are the bananas, how many degrees are the oranges. All you have to do is take the decimal form of each percent. So apple is 40%, right? 40% means 40 out of 100, right? That's how you change a percent into a decimal. You divide it by 100. So this will give me the decimal form of the percent, and then we're going to multiply that by 360. So when you take 40 divided by 100, and you multiply that by 360, you could do that all in your calculator, you're going to end up getting 144. That tells me how many degrees the apple is represented by. All right, for bananas, it says bananas are 35% of the pie chart. So to figure out how many degrees of the circle that is, I would take my percent and write it as a decimal, which means 35 divided by 100, or 35 out of 100, because percentages are out of 100. And I want to multiply that by 360, because there are 360 degrees in a circle. And when you take 35 divided by 100 times 360, you're going to get 126 degrees. Finally, our oranges. When you look at the oranges, it says they are 25%. Maybe some of you already know what a quarter of 360 is. That's okay. Take 25 divided by 100. That's our 25%. And we'll multiply that by 360. And when you do that, you end up getting 90. Doesn't that look like a 90-degree angle right here? Yes. And that's a quarter of 360. 360 divided by 4 is 90. So it's all kind of connected here. When you add all of those up, to make sure that you're right, you should end up getting 360. So when I take 144 and I add 126 and then I add 90 to it, lo and behold, you will get 360 degrees, because this takes up the entire circle, so you should. So that's how you can convert these percentages into degrees. And why are you going to want to do that? Well, because when you make your pie charts, I'm not going to give you a bunch of little tally marks. I'm going to give you just an empty circle and a protractor, and it's going to be your job to place them in there, not based on percents. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to make our circle graph. If you don't have a protractor, you're going to need one. I'm guessing we're going to do this lesson in class together, but there will be some of you who are absent that still need to watch it. So you need a protractor. Press pause, try to get it. Don't try to eyeball it and draw a bunch of crooked lines. You need one. Welcome back. Okay, so this table shows the results of a survey. Display the data in the circle graph. We have favorite amusement park, and I didn't actually go out and collect this data. I just got this data from the book. But in this survey, 25 people said Disney World was their favorite, 15 said Busch Gardens, 12 said Universal Studios, and 8 said Marineland, which honestly I don't even know what that is, I'm guessing something with water. Water's always fun. So these aren't percentages. These are just number of people, right? If I'm trying to figure out how many degrees this is, we said to find the number of degrees, you need to take the percent as a decimal, and we need to multiply that by 360, right? Well, on the other sheet, I divided 40 by 100 and multiplied it by 360, because when you have a full circle, percentage-wise, that means 100%, right? So those all added up to 100. In order to figure out the percent as a decimal of the 25 people, it doesn't mean 25. I want to know what percent it is. So I need to know what it's out of. So your step one for all of these, when you're trying to display data in a circle graph, you need to add up the number of frequencies, the number of people total. And when you take 25 plus 15 plus 12 plus 8, and you add them all up, you would get 60. So there's your step one. Add them all up, we get 60. Step number 2, and these are all listed right out here, nice for you. It says find the angle measure for each section of the graph. To do that, you divide the people by the total number of people and multiply it by 360. So that's kind of what we did on the front here. So it's 25 out of 60. That gives me my percent as a decimal. So 25 divided by 60, and I want it in degrees, so I'm going to multiply that by 360. And when you do that, that gives you the number of degrees in this, which should be 150 degrees. For Busch Gardens, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to take this 15 and divide it by 60, because it's 15 out of 60, and this time I wrote it differently on purpose, so you know that this division sign and this division sign mean the same thing. And you'll multiply that by 360. And when you take 15 divided by 60 times 360, you get 90 degrees. For Universal Studios, it's 12 out of 60. So 12 divided by the total frequencies times 360. And when you do that, you'll get 72 degrees. And for Marineland, 8 out of 60 times 360. And that gives you 48 degrees. So again, when you're trying to figure out the degrees, you need to add up all the frequencies. That's just the number of people that voted. And you divide each frequency by the total and multiply it by 360, because there's 360 degrees in a circle and you want it to be degrees. Okay. Step number 3. I know, we're only on step 3. It's crazy. Draw a line from the center of the circle to the edge of the circle. So I give you the center of the circle. We want to draw a nice straight line from the center of the circle over. Voila. Then it says, well, this is your starting point. So this is a line you're going to kind of start with. Step number 4. Use a protractor to draw the angle measures you calculated in step number 2, and make sure you label the sections as you graph. So here's our starting point. I know that Disney World is 150 degrees, right? I'm banking on you having used one of these before, but just the basic gist of it, these are degrees listed across the top. You can start at 0, or we can start at 180. If you start at 0, we're going 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and this is clockwise here. Sometimes you might start measuring from the opposite side, go over. But just remember, if this is your starting point, you start at 0. If it's your ending point, it ends at 180. So this is half of a circle here. There's 180 degrees in half of a circle. Okay, in order to measure out 150 degrees from this, you want to set it up so that this line in the center, or some of the protractors have a circle in the center, you want to set it right up so that this line, this edge goes right over top of the other edge, and the line matches the center of the circle. Now it's 150 degrees, right? I said that this line right here was our starting point. And I think it's easier just to make this line your starting point. So when you're making this line your starting point, that means I'm starting with this 0. I'm not starting at 180. If this is a starting point, 0 is a starting point. I want to go all the way over to 150. So there's 10, 20, 30, 40, all the way. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. I see 150 is right here. I'm going to put just a little dot above the 150. So do that, put a little dot right there. Then I can connect the center of the circle to that dot. This was my starting point. We measured on over, so this is 150 degrees. This represents Disney World. You don't need to write anything else in there. Just write Disney World. Okay, so the next one that we have is Busch Gardens. And Busch Gardens says 90 degrees. This was our starting point last time. Our new starting point is going to be the line you just drew. So I'm going to turn my paper over so that this line that I ended with is my new starting point. I'm going to set it up so that the line matches the center of the circle and the edge of the protractor lines right up with the line I just drew. Now I want 90 degrees. So if this is my starting point here, that means I'm starting at 0 here. And I want to count all the way to 90. So here's 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. I'm going to put a little dot above the 90. Then I'm going to connect the center to the outside. So I'm just lining this dot up here. I'm not going to draw my line all the way up there. I'm going to draw my line to the outside edge of the circle. And whenever we draw 90 degrees, you usually put the little box in there to represent that that's 90 degrees. And we said that that was Busch Gardens. All right. The next one that we have is Universal Studios, which is 72 degrees. This is the line we just drew, right? So that's our new starting point. So I'm going to turn my paper over to make this my new starting point and line up my protractor right over top. That little line or circle in the center should be over the circle in the center. And the edge of this should match up with that line. And now I need 72 degrees from my starting point. So this is my starting point. That means I'm going to start at 0 here. I'm going to count all the way over to 72. Here's 70. 72, 1, 2. Put a little dot above it. Same thing. Line it up from the center of the circle. That dot. Stop at the edge. This little piece of the puzzle is Universal Studios. I'm just going to call it US. I don't think there's enough room. And Marineland is supposed to be 48 degrees, right? Well, if Marineland is 48 degrees and we've done this correctly, this should be 48 degrees. So let's just give it a quick measure to make sure. This was my last line that I drew, so I'll make that my new starting point. And as you count over, here's my starting point, 0, 48 degrees, here's 45, 46, 48 degrees is about this right here, right? Which is where it does match up. So we know that we've done it right. So I'm going to write Marineland in here. You should too. I know, a little bit tedious, but that's how you do it with degrees. When you're not given a whole bunch of little tally marks to represent the percentages, that's all you have to do. All right, one last little thing here. We want to be able to use a circle graph. So turn your page, and here we go. So I'm giving you a circle graph, and this is just kind of circle graph 101, and we're going to use some fractional concepts to help us out. But basically, if you understand a half and a quarter, we'll be okay. So circle graph shows the results of a survey on favorite sports. So looking at the sports, we have baseball, football, basketball, and swimming. And apparently that's it. No one said anything else. I don't know. Letter A asks you, which sport is the least popular? Well, what's nice about looking at a circle graph is it's kind of easy to identify what's the most popular and what's the least popular. Least popular is just the smallest piece of pie. So in looking at this, there aren't any values in here, but we can see that swimming is the smallest piece of pie. If I asked you which was the most popular, you'd say baseball, because that's half of the pie. Baseball got greedy. It ate half of the pie. Letter B says, compare the number of students who chose football with the number of students that chose baseball. Now, I know I didn't give you any values for the number of students, but we don't need values here. When you're looking at this, baseball takes up half of the pie chart. And football, if I drew a line here, it takes up 1/4, right? Think about this. Let's say that we ask 200 people. If we ask 200 people their favorite sport, and it shows half of the pie chart shows baseball, how many of those 200 would choose baseball? 100, right? Because it's half. So if half is 100 and football is 1/4, how many of the 200 would be football? If this is 100, wouldn't football be half of that? So it would be 50, right? So we don't need values here. We know that if we're comparing baseball and football, that twice as many people chose baseball, or half of the people chose football. I'm just going to say twice as many chose baseball. If you took two, it would take 2 footballs to fill up the baseball, right? So twice as many chose baseball. All right, last part here. The survey included 60 students. How many chose football? Well, we kind of just worked our way around this, and we're going to use just some number sense here. If the survey was 60 students, so 60 students total represent this entire pie chart, and I ask you how many chose football, there's 2 ways to figure this out. You can use what we just figured out about football and baseball. If the survey is 60 students, how many people chose baseball? Half of 60, right? So 30. And if twice as many chose baseball compared to football, if 30 chose baseball, wouldn't it mean that 30 divided by 2 chose football? So we'd get 15? Yeah, so that's one way to do it. It's 15. If we know that football represents 1/4 of this whole thing, though, you could just take 1/4 of 60. And remember that word of means multiplication, so that means 1/4 times 60, which you end up writing a 1 underneath, multiply across the top, multiply across the bottom, and yes, 60 divided by 4 is 15. So 15 students. That's how you can use a pie chart to answer some questions. See you tomorrow.